Assalamu alaikum and hello. I am Faryal on UVIV Global. Glaciers melt and heavens part and pour with ensuing monsoon flooding no longer just a freak event of nature, but a man-made disaster which experts warn might be the new normal for Pakistan, most vulnerable to global warming despite making negligible contribution to global emissions. Pakistan is among the top 10 countries facing the onslaught of global warming and climate change. In the year 2022, the country witnessed the most devastating floods in its history, which killed around 1,700 people, affected another 33 million, and incurred losses worth $30 billion. dollars. This year again, at least 301 people, including 140 children, have died, and more than 700 have been injured in monsoon flash floods as the seasonal spell continues. I am honored to be joined here by Maryam Shabbir Abbasi, who is an environmental expert, and she joins me here from the United States. She's also a visiting senior research associate with the Sustainable Development Policy Institute in Islamabad. Maryam, thank you for being on the show.
Thank you very much for inviting.
So the Pakistan Meteorological Department and the provincial disaster management authorities here, they have warned again this week that a spell of heavy torrential rains will continue through mid-August, leading to more urban flooding in various cities that, of course, causes death and destruction, and that we've witnessed before in 2010, 2011, 2022, and again this year. How far do you think we have come in terms of better warning and forecasting procedures since the calamitous 2022 floods in order to basically better deal with these disasters and emergencies?
I think as far as the warning of the events is concerned, we have improved certainly. At least we issue warnings, which kind of provides a little bit of time if someone wants to leave that situation. But it still needs a lot of improvements because the window of the warning is not enough. But we need to work a lot towards like communicating that warning because not lots of people know that any NDMA or PDMAs they issues warning related to rainfall or flooding or heat waves, and they don't know where they need to go and read those. So I think that's the area where a lot of work is required.
Hmm. Also, because I think these floods are very sudden, and they are certainly brutal on systems that might be unprepared and overwhelmed. Recently, there was a group of researchers which was a part of the World Weather Attribution Group at the Imperial College London. And that group included experts from Pakistani and European universities and meteorological agencies. And they stated in a report that Pakistan is one of the countries which is least prepared to deal with the impact of climate change, and that human actions have they led to 15% heavier rains than average this year in Pakistan, while talking about the anthropogenic aspect and the man-made disasters, saying that human actions they lead to weather anomalies. Now, this report, it also says that climate change is taken seriously in Pakistan, but financing is absent. What is your take on this statement? Is it only about lack of funds? And are we taking climate change seriously enough in Pakistan? Because, it's one thing to deal with these catastrophic floods after they have struck, and it's another thing to work on long-term mitigation and preparedness.
I think both situation, I would say I agree with both the reasons which Pakistani government, especially because at government level they negotiate these things. So I do agree that we need financing at certain level because in the beginning you told also mentioned figures that how much we have like lost in terms of money when it comes to these flooding. And it's just not flooding. This is just one example. It also affects your health. It also like creates depression, which is like non-economic losses that also it affects your agriculture, small businesses, houses. It affects education. It leads to early childhood marriages. So it has like really long-term impacts in terms of economic losses as well as non-economic losses. We do need like resources to work on those, but there are lots of things which needs to be done in Pakistan, and that doesn't require a lot of funds, to be honest. For example, if one wants to work on mental health issues which are like traumas are created during flooding, because people lose their loved ones. I myself was worked with the communities, on ground lots of times when I was working back in Sustainable Development Policy Institute. And there were lots of girls who left school because their families, they prioritize boys' education as a result of flooding, because parents lost everything, in the flooding, their houses, their small businesses, their agricultural land. And they were really afraid, they were really afraid that, oh, next time floods comes, and what if something happens to us? What would happen to our girl,
Hmm.
They ended up like marrying those girls at very early age, and they were unable to get education. So for example, trauma was one thing which I was talking about. Then afforestation doesn't require a lot of resources. Then these illegal constructions which lead to urban flooding. And we have seen like recently it was discussed a lot, but it was always there when population was increasing, and private housing societies, those kept on increasing. Not just illegal but legal housing societies as well. Government institutions did not take those like much seriously when it came to like developmental projects in terms of like these big housing societies, and those requires environmental impact assessments as a requirement. It's government responsibility to, based on that environmental impact assessment, they need to go back to those housing sites and see if they have implemented environmental components into those or not. So, policy implementation, improving governance, having plans at federal and provincial levels, what if money comes in,
Hmm.
or the consulates of every country, which especially rich countries, which are like in Pakistan, like having negotiations with them and bringing smaller projects, including World Bank and those kind of institutions too, So, there are lots of things which can be done, but that requires will.
Hmm.
And I think will also comes from how long a government stays in the government, and because every government doesn't stay for whatever reason, they are unable to complete their tenure for 5 years. So what
Yeah.
happens is that they take up such projects which should be like popular in populations, so that they can get vote next time,
Yes.
so
Yes.
they end up like building flyovers or roads or such visible projects. But climate change needs long-term planning, like bigger projects, afforestation, which should be like sustainable, working on waste management system, so there are lots of things which can be done on like at country level and provincial level without a lot of resources, with the will and with human capacity and human resources. And there are lots of things like in terms of damage that needs to be done with the help of like funding from international community under Paris Agreement.
Hmm. And there's some kind of awareness raising, I think, also that doesn't really require a lot of funds. Um, we
Absolutely,
can, we
absolutely.
can,
Just
we should
awareness
start with
raising.
that also because people here don't know. The common man on the street probably doesn't know how we are harming the environment and in so many ways. So we just spoke of funds, and last week, Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif he announced 4 billion rupees for mapping damage to infrastructure in Gilgit-Baltistan and reconstruction efforts after the recent floods, which ideally could have been better dedicated towards, I would say, mitigation and preparedness. But now we are told that temperature rise in areas of Gilgit-Baltistan like Chitral and Chelas and Banji is 1.5 times higher than the plains, which leads to glacial lake outburst flooding, Gloves. Why is there a higher rate of temperature rise in northern areas? If you could just explain to us briefly as an environment expert, with temperatures going into 40s, and how effective are the UNDP and government of Pakistan GLOF projects that are working in these areas?
I think the temperature change is like witnessed everywhere, but it's like alarming when it comes to like northern areas, because we always like travel, go to north in summer. Lots of people go
Mm.
there. enjoy the cool weather. But there are lots of reasons which has contributing to that, and topmost reason is of course the emissions, greenhouse gases, which leads to glacier melting. But there are lots of local factors too, which does contribute to those emissions. But international contribution does involve with with northern area, India and China, those countries, bigger emitters of fossil fuel emissions. And Pakistan also does emit, but the global share is lesser. But that doesn't mean we don't emit enough. So that also contributes, but also there is lots of deforestation going on in the area of Gilgit-Baltistan, especially in area of the Amir, where I was in touch with one of the local journalists who works there, and he was telling that recently a project has been approved literally by the government of Pakistan based on this study, which was conducted in 1990s. And according to that study, there is the forest cover is a lot. So when there's like lots of forest cover in lesser land, it's allowed to, cut some of the trees and vegetation cover. But that has changed with the passage of time, and that needs like latest research of mapping, what is the situation right now. And accordingly, that should contribute to that. So the deforestation is another thing. Then timber mafia is another factor, and loss of landslides and mudslides are triggered because on mountains, you see the forest cover has been removed like at an accelerated rate. So that contributes to lots of flooding. And GLOF, there's a small percentage of local contributor, which is when I traveled to Gilgit-Baltistan for one of the project, I witnessed myself, and I think that requires a study, I would say, to really come up with numbers that how much that is contributing to glacier melting. And that is that some of the locals, they literally go up on donkeys and they cut glacier and they make gola danda out of it and sell in the market. So that also, I believe that I don't know how many people because my research area at that time was different. So that area really, really requires some attention and study to come up like how that is contributed. That as far as the GLOF projects with UNDP and government of Pakistan is concerned, I think there are some local grievances related to those projects because there is certainly success, but some of the local people were telling, I was in conversation with them and they were informing that those projects are not sustainable. And after recent floodings and accelerated glacier melting, they were really, really worried and they were really blaming that those funds could have been used for like more effectiveness instead of just building like smaller bridges, which is swept away every time with the flooding. So I think that project particularly needs revision and local communities should be taken on board and their input should be taken that what kind of measurements they are looking to incorporate into that instead of someone who is sitting in Islamabad and deciding what needs to be done in northern areas.
Mm, totally agree with that. Pakistan is home to over 7,200 glaciers, which is the highest number anywhere outside the poles. But I was going through this another study, and according to that study, I don't recall the source. If this trend of extreme temperatures and GLOFs continues for another 2 decades, we will perhaps lose up to 50% of our glaciers in Pakistan, which is extremely unfortunate because it's a very valuable natural resource. And of course, that's also going to cause a lot of devastation and destruction. Coming to the handling back, you've talked a little about what we should be doing, but coming back to that, we have the National Disaster Management Authority, and then we have a provincial national provincial disaster management authority, and then one at a district level. And they were all constituted under the National Disaster Management Act following the floods of 2010. Now, these agencies are allegedly working in silos. I mean, there are claims of little coordination among them, which sometimes maybe leads to some kind of confusion. What do you suggest should be done to improve coordination and harmony among these government wings in this multi-tiered system?
I think the coordination between different government departments has always been an issue whether it comes to like environment and climate change or other issues, that has always been an issue. And to overcome that, there were some committees were formed, some advisory committees were also formed to take like people from like provincial level as well and meet like twice a year and come up with plans. Even back in Pakistan, I was member of National Standing Committee on Climate Change, and we never met. They never convened a meeting. So it speaks volume about the like will, but I think moving forward, and then previous governments tried to come up with an idea of 18th Amendment in which like the environment is the provincial subject among other issues, and they try to give power to provinces as well. But
Mm.
we have seen over time that provinces has also failed to like use that power for the betterment of environment, and that could have led to easily like working towards like district level and grassroots levels when it comes to environment and climate change. But climate change is a shared responsibility among governments. So there's like power disbalance between provinces and government because finances directly reach to international finances, whatever portion reaches, it directly comes to climate change ministry. And then that is responsible to distribute. But we have seen in chunks, Sin government was able to secure some international funds too. But I think moving forward, what needs to be done is that government needs to literally develop an institution for coordination, and that should have like lots of power, that should have lots of powers and rule and regulations, and that should make everyone to convene. And in today's digital era, it's very, very easy to convene, like wherever in the world you're sitting, you just Zoom in or over Teams online, just do the consultations, and there should be plans. We have policy, but we don't have plans for implementation of policies. So we need plan which involves like district level governments and authorities, which should include grassroots level communities, and that's the way forward, in my opinion. Empower communities, train them, because they are the one when disaster struck, they are the one who try to help each other in their limited capacity,
Mm.
and that's the only way, like having a coordination ministry which coordinates a lot of institutions, involve local communities, empower them, give them trainings, and there are lots of other things too which needs to be done. For example, like when it comes to like issue of, for example, waste management, it's a huge issue when it comes to flooding. Lots of like drainage which are supposed to be empty, whether those are covered by illegal construction or with waste. So, and this water is, this water can be a potential to store water and use eventually, but it's so dirty that it leads to like epidemics and lots of health issues instead of being a blessing. So it can't really be used because it has so much like industrial waste and domestic waste and hospital waste even. So I think having a dedicated institute for coordination, but most importantly, having plans. Every province should dedicate teams to develop plans for every city, every rural area, every town by involving locals over there, and then just not make plans but implement them eventually.
Mm.
So that requires a lot of work, and that is where Pakistan has never worked.
Yeah, implementation is key. And I think this is where Pakistan is lacking, like you just mentioned. Coming back to the development strategies that you just mentioned at the beginning, perhaps we need a paradigm shift in the way infrastructural development is carried out. Our infrastructural development approach, I think, is too profit driven. It's faulty, it's not climate sensitized. There are large urban projects, like you mentioned earlier, illegal and sometimes even legal construction. On river banks, but without regard for regulations. There are structures that are not resilient. How can Pakistan now ensure compliance with regulations, which is very much the need of the times? Because this seems to have become an annual event now.
I think it goes back to again governance, because there are some institution in Pakistan who wants to work and who actually work. For example, environmental protection agencies. They have very limited resources. They have very limited human resources, monetary resources too. And they try to, work really hard to implement some of the policy solutions. For example, back in Pakistan, I was an important stakeholder when ban on single-use plastic ban was, done. So at that time, EPAs, along with deputy commissioner and commissioner, they really tried to enforce, and then COVID-19 came and that priority a little bit shifted. But I would say 80% they were successful in that. But
Mhm.
now the issue is that some of the institute, for example, environmental protection agencies, when they monitor industries and they put a ban on them because of their emission levels, just imagine, next day the industry is open again. Why? Because those industrialists have direct links with people sitting in parliament, or people
Abs-
sitting in parliaments are owners of those industries. So
Absolutely.
their hands are
Absolutely.
like tied. Now the relevant institutions, they don't have power.
Mhm.
What can they do? Nothing. So I think under law, there are lots of laws which which allows common citizen and even different institutes to take action on that. But since our system is in such a way that it doesn't work,
Mhm.
even related to climate change and environment.
Mhm.
So moving forward, I think empowering institutions, the way I think Islamabad police is empowered, I would say, because they can fine whoever violates, whether that is politician or someone, for from any class,
Mhm.
without any pressure, because people know, even politicians know, if they want, follow those rules, that would either go to media or their institution would take further action. So similarly, we need to implement our laws, and institutions should be like powerful enough that they can implement the policies and laws we have, particularly the housing societies, and how they can be like climate resilient. That is a complete science itself. There are, like, for example, urban planners should be taken on board moving forward. Then whatever existing, how we can improve them, like planting more indigenous plants. Then learning from neighboring countries, for example, China, how vertical housing society is something we can do. What kind of materials moving forward should be used for constructing houses? Because right now the asphalt, that is absorbs a lot of heat, when which we use for for construction of our homes and
Mhm.
whatever buildings we do. So those experts can be taken on board based on like changing climate. For example, whenever there is flood, how much that can be raised from like the ground. And there are lots of like technical things which I think can be done. But that requires a lot of planning, lots of planning and then implementation.
Implementation is key. Absolutely. The recent River Swat incident, in which the very unfortunate one, in which a family from Sialkot, they lost their lives, and the conditions that we are discussing have obviously also made River Swat more conducive to flash flooding. But there's also been unchecked resource extraction from the river, and unregulated and immense gravel and sand mining in River Sawat for building and construction projects. Now, mining here is only legal under the regulation that protects the river's natural course. We have the KP River Protection Act and mining of minerals from Riverbed Rules 2022, and according to which you cannot mine more or dig deeper than a set limit. But obviously, these regulations are ignored. But what role do you think this unrestrained riverbed mining has played in destroying the riverine ecosystem, sustaining River Sawat and areas around it, and maybe also has destroyed other such resource-rich rivers in Pakistan?
Absolutely. I think it's just not the river mining that is a major contributor to, for disturbing the soil bedding within like riverbeds, like disturbance of those. But it also is the, again, construction of hospitality sectors on those, and that is being improved by provincial governments. And also removal of forest covers, because there should be, like, according to laws, we were just discussing in previous response that, how lack of implementation of laws have contributing to these things. So again, it's a governance issue, and I think that needs to be implemented. But of course, the resource mining, if something is in nature and you are disturbing that by use of machinery and equipment, that definitely would respond back to and also in areas, in northern areas, in these rivers, gold mining is also done where mercury is used excessively, and that is also being used, thrown back into the rivers. That also pollutes and also disturbs, of course, with flooding. But also the attached issue which accelerate is the deforestation again. The Swat incident was very, 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 very unfortunate, and that greatly impacted everyone, including me. And I was like unable to speak to lots of media friends. They were requesting to give my opinion on environment and climate change issues, and I had to apologize to them because I was not ready to speak. That affected me just by watching video. That kind of trauma,
Very
everyone
heartbreaking. It really leaves
experiences.
an impact on you. Yeah.
And what I want to talk about in that video is that, once I was I tried to overcome out of it, then in that video you would see there's tree behind, which is which stays there throughout. So if we don't remove trees around those areas, that kind of also can block the speed of water. You cannot stop flooding because there are lots of other associated factor too, but you can try to work on speed because by planting lots of indigenous trees. So if
Mm.
that tree was there, more trees were there, that could have been impacted, but that also involves lots of other factors. For example, there was warning issues by PDMAs, and why there was no implementation on at provincial level by the relevant institutions, why hospitality sectors were not shut down because of those warnings, because lots of tourists don't know at all that these warnings are being communicated. They don't know whether they need to, and they are not aware of local context too, that how sudden flooding works in local areas, because they are not familiar to those places. They come from to beat the heat, they travel to these areas to cool down and enjoy. So that particular issue is very, very complicated. But of course, disturbing riverbed also accelerate lots of disasters.
Yes, this adds to the list that you have, the things, the factors that you've already mentioned. We'll talk a little about the Indus Delta, which again, I was reading, has been turned into another ecological disaster because it's the place where the Indus River meets the Arabian Sea in the south. And there's seawater intrusion into the delta that has triggered the collapse of fishing communities there, and it has forced more than 1.2 million people to be displaced from the Indus Delta over the last 20 years or so, according to a UN Office for Disaster Risk Reduction report, which was published in March this year. What do you think has led to this encroaching of seawater into this delta? Is it a combination of all the factors that we have already spoken about, or are there any peculiar factors that are just, they just revolve around this particular ecological disaster?
I think there are lots of factors too, in that. For example, we talked about gloves, that how those are melting at an accelerated rate, and glacier melting is 50 to 60% water in Indus River is because it comes from glacier melting, and Pakistan is heavily dependent on that. But also rainwater is also does contribute to Indus River, and then some of the water which comes from India also contributes to our Indus River, which lots of communities and even whole Pakistan is dependent on that for various activities. So one factor, climate change has impacted the water availability. It is reducing with the passage of time. Some days, in winters we don't have rainfall and we don't have enough water in this river, and it's disappearing. And the other time it's flooding and flooding and flooding, and it doesn't stay. And as soon as summer, at the start of the summer comes, the water evaporates and it goes into the atmosphere again. So we are not making best use of water. But as far as the particular concern about Indus River is concerned, and the Indus Delta is concerned, uh, anything which is in moderation, that is key to sustainability, that is key to equilibrium, in simple words.
Which is
Over
balance,
extraction,
basically. Hmm.
of course, over extraction does contribute to that, but there are lots of, and I won't name a country, I think everyone knows. On Indus River, there's lots of like activity going on, and fishing is going on by another country on our land. And we and local community don't get benefit of that, honestly speaking. And I think while signing contracts with other countries, transparency is very, very important, and that should be for the benefit of the local communities in those areas, not for other country to extract our resources, whether that is fish or not, and then exploit our resources and contribute to that. I think from past 10 years, that is also contributing to this disappearing deltas, but also deforestation again, for example, particularly in say mangrove covers is, that is also like decreasing with the passage of time, and mangroves are really support, fish population. So if mangrove cover is disappearing, so is fish. So that also like affect, fishing communities too, but fishing communities, they don't have like other sources of their livelihood. So I never blame local communities for depending on a resource which is originally theirs.
Hmm.
I think there are lots of other contributing factors that should be addressed. Not. I never talk about like targeting soft target when it comes to, for example, smog as well. Only farmers and break kilns owners are targeted, not the vehicle transportation or industries. So I think we need to focus on bigger fishes than the smaller ones.
Hmm. And meanwhile, I think there's also the looming threat to the river and its delta with the recently revoked Indus Water Treaty by India, which of course divides control over the Indus Basin rivers. Two factors I think pose some of the biggest challenges while managing climate change. Firstly, it's the instability, as Mariam has just spoken about it. If the governments are unstable, there's instability in governance. Governments usually focus on short-term visible projects that can drive immediate public approval for political gains rather than investing in long-term climate resilience. And secondly, it's the heft and clout of powerful interest groups, especially in the fossil fuel and the construction sector. These groups, they employ pressure on lawmakers, and they are sometimes themselves a part of the law-making machinery, like again Mariam mentioned, so that policies that threaten their economic interests are never implemented. Unchecked urban development, illegal expansion of housing societies despite known environmental risks, all of this it highlights how private interests of a few override larger good of the people and the planet. Maryam Abbasi, I'm very grateful to you for making time for me. Thank you so much. That's all for now. Till next time, Allah Hafiz and goodbye.